Okay, Moby-Dick, last lecture. Unless you own the whale. I already tried to record this once and it ate it, so I'll try this again. All right, the Pequod goes down in rebellion and defiance, just like Satan in Paradise Lost, and not without dragging a living part of heaven with it, as we're told in the second to last sentence of the book. A living part of heaven. That means Starbuck, Stubb, Queequeg, poor Pip, and all the rest of the crew. It's a near total defeat that strikes the reader as a little bit demented, demonic, and frankly, quite pointless. The sea rolls on as it rolled 5,000 years ago when the world began. And nothing has changed. None of Ahab's questions have been answered in the end. Is the white whale an agent of divine will, or just an understandably pissed off marine mammal that chomps at you instinctively when you throw spears at it? Does the almost impossible beauty of the world bespeak a grand design behind all the apparent injustice and suffering and loss, or is life really just what it appears to be on the surface so much of the time, one thing after another, much of it quite awful, either unfortunate at best or outrageous at worst? The novel raises these questions again and again, but never comes close to answering them. So how does that leave us any better off than when we started? We are. Unequivocally, I want to say we are better off. Even without the answers to these questions, there is another kind of wisdom that we can glean from this journey, from this novel. Let me explain. Think back to the beginning of the year when we read parts of Don Quixote. I had you copy into your notebooks a paragraph by a Czech novelist named Milan Kundera, who claims that Quixote was the first novel in the Western world, written in 1607, I think 1607, somewhere around there, during the Spanish Renaissance. And in this passage, he's trying to define what this new art form, the novel, is. And Kundera says this. You may remember this from your notebooks. He says, "The novel's wisdom is different from that of philosophy. The novel is born not of the theoretical spirit, but of the spirit of humor." He goes on to say, "The art of the novel, inspired by God's laughter, does not by nature serve ideological certitudes, it contradicts them. Like Penelope, it undoes each night the tapestry that the theologians, philosophers, and learned men have woven the day before." So you remember Penelope, right, from the Odyssey. She's weaving a burial shroud for her husband Odysseus, whom she thinks is lost at sea. And the rules are that when she's done with the shroud, she has to marry one of the suitors, which she doesn't really want to do. So at night, she's going in and like undoing the weaving work she's done during the day. That's what the novel does, Kundera says. That's what Moby-Dick does. It doesn't leave you with like a definite answer to the problem of evil. Rather, it gently and often humorously unravels the kind of half answers that others have given. And finally even unravels the question itself too, making room for perhaps a new kind of wisdom to be born, a wisdom that is found in waiting on the truth, which is always bigger than any philosophical system or puzzle that we can make to try to contain it or express it. The spirit of the novel, Kundera says, is the spirit of laughter. And we certainly see lots of laughter in Melville, but it's not just any laughter, he insists. The novel helps us to hear what he calls the laughter of God. It's like this, right? You know, it's like human beings have this thing where we turn life into a test that we're trying really hard to pass. But it turns out that no one can pass it, not just because the answers are too lofty for us to grasp, you know, what is the meaning of life and all that, but because life actually was never a test in the first place. We just thought it was. So, you know, we work away at solving these conundrums, trying to pin down the truth, and you have to imagine God just laughing. This life was never a test at all. It was a gift. It It was a gift all along, a gift and not a test. That's what the laughter of God reveals, the laughter of the novel that echoes through Moby-Dick. There's a line at the end of chapter 76 of Moby-Dick. He says, for unless you own the whale, you are but a provincial and sentimentalist in truth. Unless you own the whale, you are but a provincial and sentimentalist in truth. Okay, first of all, just pause and think about how silly that image is. I mean, can you imagine someone giving you an inspirational speech and telling you, you must own the whale, right? It's like something Andy Dwyer would say, not even Ron Swanson. Let's define these other terms, though. Unless you own the whale, you're but a provincial and sentimentalist in truth. A provincial is someone who's inexperienced, who's never been outside of his small town or province, and so hasn't really seen enough of life to judge it accurately. And a sentimentalist, as we learned from Sense and Sensibility, is someone who bases their beliefs on like warm and fuzzy feelings that they want to be true, sentiments, right, regardless of the facts. If we don't want to be provincials or sentimentalists, if we want the truth itself, we're going to have to own the whale, Melville says. And it is a ridiculous expression, but he's saying, right, we have to be willing to face the hard stuff, the stuff that might chomp us, or we don't really have any business using words like truth or goodness or beauty because we haven't earned the right to them by facing and knowing their opposites. Melville is always trying to explode and expand our sense of truth, often using humor to gently unravel our sort of more cheaply held beliefs and received traditions and easy certainties. And that's the spirit of the novel. That's the wisdom of it. But there is a problem, right? Even though it's pretty funny, Moby-Dick is not really a comedy. The spirit of laughter is shot through the whole thing, but the plot structure ends in tragedy, ends in why? You could say on the one hand, Ahab doesn't really get the joke. Ahab has maybe done more than try to just own the whale. He's gone after the whale. He has stalked it and stabbed it and provoked confrontation with it when a confrontation didn't need to be happening. Ahab is not just trying to own the truth. He's trying to, possess it or something. He's not trying to encounter the truth as a condition. He's not trying to encounter the dark things in the world as a condition of the truth. He's trying to sort of elevate them to a kind of first principle in the universe. That doesn't work out well for him. Ahab is whatever the opposite of a humorist is, whatever the opposite of a sentimentalist or provincialist or something. Maybe the opposite of somebody who's sentimental and funny would be something like hard-hearted, someone who's hard-hearted. Let's go with that. That's Ahab. Ahab is hard-hearted. There is no laughter in him, as there is in the soft-hearted and maybe somewhat light-headed Ishmael. There's a famous C.S. Lewis essay called Men Without Chests, in which Lewis says, this is the problem with modernity, is that we try to get rid of the heart so that we seem like we're smarter, but we're actually not. Lewis says our heads are really no bigger than ordinary. It is the atrophy of the chest, the shrinking of the chest beneath that makes them seem so. In the modern times, we seem like we're so much smarter and we've got reason, but are we, or have we just sort of lost this other part of us, become men without chests? You get the image, right? We can cut out the heart and our heads appear bigger, but are we really any smarter? The lesson of Ahab is that he doesn't actually gain any special access to the truth by cutting out emotion, sentiment, love, beauty, comfort, romance, family, his pipe, his home, all the things that we would broadly associate with the heart. He's just a man without a chest now, or at least he tries to be. He still feels a lot of feels, Ahab, mostly sad ones, but you get the point, right? The hard-hearted person, the person who lacks a heart, is no closer to the truth at the end of the day than the sentimentalist and the provincial. it's almost like, there is no organ for truth, but the whole self. It's not in the head, it's not in the heart, it's in the harmony that exists in the whole person, which is what the ancient philosophers like Plato and Aristotle meant by the word virtue, right? Virtue is all parts of the self working together, reason and passion and appetite performing their proper functions in the tripartite soul. For those of you who've read The Republic, that's the ancient view. Enlightenment thinkers, that's what we're studying this year. Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Kant and Locke, they thought that the reason alone, just the head, could lead us to the truth. And a lot of people still think this today. While maybe like on the other hand, romantic poets like Wordsworth and Blake thought that all we needed was love. All we needed was to come forth and bring a heart that watches and receives, and we can have like emotional access to the deeper truths of being, right? And a lot of maybe romantic people still think this today too. The legacy of romanticism is long. It casts a long shadow. The same with the Enlightenment. And of course, I'm oversimplifying, right? Both the Enlightenment philosophers and the Romantic poets here for the sake of contrast. I'm trying to bring out the point that if the ancients and maybe to an extent the medievals, who thought that truth was a synthesis of the self, of the head and the heart, if they could see our culture, if they could analyze modernity, they would surely call us schizophrenic, as we kind of whiplash back and forth between cold reason and calculation on the one hand, and warm fuzzy feelings without any regard for facts on the other hand. And we lack like the real integration of the two of those things, of the head and the heart, that they called virtue or wisdom. In any case, when Ahab gets chomped, or I guess he doesn't actually really get chomped, does he, this time? He more gets sort of like silently disappeared. There's that incredible and very quick passage, right? Hemp alone can kill him is the prophecy. And so he's like a Turkish assassin. Just all of a sudden the rope gets him and he's gone. Okay, so when Ahab gets hemped, I guess, instead of chomped, and the Pequod goes down, stove by Moby-Dick's battering ram of a head. Then we get to the last sentence of the last chapter, which closes the book with an image of the sea. All of Ahab's questions, all of his hatreds are swallowed up in the sea so that nothing remains. And it's sort of the same with the reader's questions too. I mean, I'm still left wondering, is Moby-Dick, the spirit of the non-human world striking back at human beings for wreaking havoc on nature? Was Starbuck right? After all, was Ahab wrong, or was he just cursed? The sea doesn't care. The sea rolls on as before, as it always has, and doesn't seem to provide much of an answer to these questions beyond suggesting that the massive indifference of the world to our questions is maybe a kind of answer to them, maybe. If so, it's a very difficult answer for us to grasp. I mean, we care about our lives so much. We love the things we love. Surely the world must care about what we love too, and must care about our life too, but it doesn't seem to, right? One day we're going to be gone and the sea is going to roll on. Possibly sea levels will be a lot higher at that point, hopefully not. And yet that's a kind of answer that's a non-answer, because I'm not going to care any less about the things that I care about just because I know that one day the sea will cover it all. Just because the stars and the ocean don't return my passion for the things and the people that I love doesn't mean that I'm going to love them any less, right? So the sea's going to roll on, and it doesn't give me much to go on. There's a Buddhist poet named Charles Wright who lives in Virginia, who starts one of his poems with the line, he says, it's hard to imagine how unremembered we all become, how quickly and finally the landscape subsumes us, and everything that we are becomes what we are not. right? It's hard to imagine how unremembered we all become. There's a kind of stark truth in that poem that we all have to live with. The sea is going to cover it all, and we will be unremembered whether we like it or not. Each one of us is just like this totally temporary constellation of loves and hates and memories and strivings that are collected here in us for a while, before they all slip back into the eternal sea of being in the end. So is that where the novel leaves us? Is that the answer that we come to at the end? Maybe. But wait, is this the end? No, it's not the end of the book. Not to this book, at least. There's an epilogue to Moby-Dick. And the epilogue suggests that maybe this like indifferent, quasi-Buddhist, quasi-materialist sea of endless eternity and water absorbing everything, maybe that image doesn't have the final word after all, although it is there. One person has miraculously escaped, survived to tell us the whole story. And how he escapes turns out to be kind of significant, I think. Initially, Ishmael survives by clinging to a coffin. That's not really what I'm interested in here. I mean, it's not like the whole book was like a 500-page setup of like planting coffins here and there along the way so that he could be saved by, a coffin. I mean, there is that element of the plot, but we get that irony that of course life can only persist by clinging to its opposite. We've talked about that, how death destroys a man, but the idea of death saves him. Still, Ishmael wouldn't survive floating on this coffin for very long. The thought of death and mortality might keep us afloat in an emergency for a little bit, but we can't live there at the expense of everything else. No, I think the real way that Ishmael is saved, and this is the key thing to pay attention to, is that he's rescued by other Nantucket sailors. He's rescued by a ship, by the Rachel, the very ship that Ahab refused to help in her search for the lost children in chapter 128. It's a ship that isn't even looking for him as he's like bobbing up and down, a human needle in a Pacific Ocean-sized haystack. Still, he is found. If you remember nothing else that I've been trying to say about this book, please remember this. In the end, Melville seems to be telling us, look, it's gonna be up to us to find and to rescue one another. So what if the world is in the business of drowning and chomping and freezing us? In that case, we may as well get down to the business of rescuing, right? Even if we don't realize that's what we're doing sometimes, and even if the search seems very unlikely, still, we're actually doing this all the time. Here we are, each of us floating through our own life in our own tiny boats, and maybe even clinging to coffins in desperate times. And then you find somebody miraculously among this whole, sea, and here's somebody else that you can paddle alongside with for a while. And it just feels like a miracle. And when you find a few more people, pretty soon you've got a whole crew. You've got family and friends and a community. And when we're lost, when we're tired, when hope is gone and the light of faith is all but extinguished, what gets us through is that we have each other. We are not as alone out there as Ahab seems to think. There are these other ships cruising around, people that you'll meet, people who are looking for the lost, people who are in mourning, and you find each other, and that's how we survive. I'll tell you one more little secret here. Some of these other people cruising around, hoping to find somebody, hoping to make contact with you, some of these people are not even alive anymore, right? One of them is Herman Melville. That's what a book is. That's what being a writer is. It's sending out these little word ships, seeing if they'll float, seeing if somebody else out there might need a life buoy or to come aboard for a while and get warm. Maybe that's what we're doing when we read. We're meeting another mind on the page, and it is a kind of miracle. For a while, we're part of a crew. Think about how big and indifferent the ocean is, and then you open a book and you found somebody, you've met another mind here, and it's a miracle in the midst of all of this to encounter a living soul. this doesn't make the ocean any less vast or any less indifferent to us, but it does make us, when we read, somehow less alone, somehow less adrift on it. Not being alone. Not being alone has actually been the key to getting Moby-Dick all along. I gave you this article before we even started reading the book, where Jeff Sanborn says, I've got the quote here. He says, what this book wants above all is to be in a meaningful relationship with you. And it will do almost anything. Tell jokes, coin words, switch genres, change moods, share dreams, kill characters, hint at blasphemies, fly into rhapsodies, go spinning off into the ether of philosophical situation. It will do all this in order to be in meaningful relationship with you. It will do anything to make that happen. So to be in meaningful relationship with you, you could say that's not just what the book is about, it's also what the book is doing. It's the work the book is doing with us and teaching us. Ahab refuses to be in relationship because he's obsessed with the truth, such that he can't even take time to stop and mourn with the captain of the Rachel. The pursuit of truth over people becomes Ahab's personal error, and eventually it becomes his own kind of hell. Like Milton's Satan, Ahab is supremely alone. He doesn't want to go meet somebody else. Ultimately, Moby-Dick, this book, is not, I want to say, it's not like a wager on the existence or the non-existence of God, so much as a wager on where God, if God exists, is most likely to be found. And that's here, in contact, in relationship with each other. If God is anywhere, it is in communion, Melville seems to say. And there are all different types of communion, from mourning to celebration, from the Rachel to the Bachelor. Take a look at that letter, too, that I uploaded, Melville writing to his friend Hawthorne, where Melville reiterates this idea of friendship as communion and salvation. That's the reading for this week. Let's face it, right? For Melville, as for many of us, the odds on God's existence or non-existence feel like they kind of ebb and flow sometimes. Our ability to believe in God or the good or like whatever form of transcendence we intuit out there often fluctuates with circumstances. It's easier in joy, harder in suffering. It's easier in health. It's harder in sickness. Sometimes it's easy to believe. Other times, not so much. Even pious Job has his breaking point where he cries out and questions God and puts on the garb of mourning instead of praise. So at last, here in the epilogue, we start to get this glimpse of what should have been obvious all along. And it's only in sort of the sadness and loss that we realize it, right? That's the essence of tragedy, is that in sadness and in loss, there's like a new perception that surfaces, almost like the coffin shooting up out of the sinking ship. That's the tragic structure of Moby-Dick. But what is this insight that we should have been seeing all along? It's that Ahab was investing in a heavy kind of truth, a kind of certainty that sinks him like a stone, when he should have been in relationship with people who were floating around him, who needed him, right? He's cruising after the white whale for the answers to it all, for the key to all mythologies, when he should be helping his friend on the Rachel. He should be a father to his child, a husband to his wife, a captain to his crew, a mate to Starbuck, Stubb, and even venial little Flask. The tragedy of Ahab here isn't how he dies. I mean, everybody dies, especially in the whaling business. The tragedy is how Ahab lives, or fails to. And when he goes down, an insight sort of pops up coffin-like that we can cling to as readers. That's the tragic structure of the book. All of this is to say that, along with Kundera, the God of the novel is not going to be the God of the philosophers or the romantic poets or the rationalists or the God of capital T truth. If there is a God here, it is the God of laughter, the God of rescue, the God of the living and the dead, the God of relationship and family and communion across time. Sometimes, in this scenario, we play the role of the castaway. Sometimes we're the ship that's seeking people out. Sometimes we're doing the rescuing. Sometimes we're the ones in need of rescue. Whatever the case, we all need to know that we're not alone, that others may find us and will set aside what they're doing in order to help. And that's the message that the book teaches. At Sloka, we talk a lot about character. One definition of character that I really like is this. Character is what makes you acceptable at a dance, invaluable in a shipwreck, right? Character is what makes you acceptable at a dance, invaluable in a shipwreck. Look, you guys, I have seen you dance in your Spirit Week videos and elsewhere, and I know you've got the dancing part covered, so that's good. You're all acceptable at a dance. But let's face it, modernity is sometimes a total shipwreck with flotsam and jetsam scattered everywhere and the detritus of history and confusion and complexity all around us, and it's hard to even know which way we should be swimming. Nevertheless, we have to ask ourselves, is there more that we could be doing to be of value in this shipwreck? This is what character is, right? You guys are smart. You don't need anybody to spell this out for you. Just look around you. Where are today's shipwrecks? Find them. Go out of your way if you have to, and do what you can to join up with any castaways you may meet. The measure of our character is not what we do when things are like comfortable and convenient and the ship is sailing along. If we're not actively seeking out the orphans and the castaways, if we're not mourning with them, with the lost, with the half-drowned, with the Ishmaels of this world, then does any of our fancy talk about character really mean much beyond just keeping up appearances? The last word in Moby-Dick is orphan. Who are the orphans of the world? Who are the Ishmaels? These are the questions. These are the questions that define the moral life. Orphans have always had a special place in the books of the Bible, which, as you know, Melville is obsessed with. Here's Job 29:12. I rescued the poor who cried for help, and the orphans who had none to assist them. I rescued the poor who cried for help, and the orphans who had none to assist them. James 1:27. Religion that God the Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress. Psalm 82:3. Defend the weak and the orphaned. Uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. We could go on and on and on. It just keeps going. I will leave you, though, with one thought during this week that we have to talk about because, it has been a week, to put it bluntly, of manifest racial injustice and civil unrest in our country. And it doesn't feel right to not say anything right now. And as we're trying to be people of character and ask what that means. I know it's not always easy to talk about some of this stuff, but unless we practice owning these whales, we are but provincials and sentimentalists about truth. And that's the kind of thing that could sink us. We need to be people of character and we're invaluable in a shipwreck. So to make this last point, in the Bible, Ishmael is an orphan because he's been cut off from his father Abraham. So while the second-born son, Isaac, goes on to father the nation of Israel, Ishmael, the firstborn, becomes the progenitor of all the dark-skinned peoples to the east. This is the book of Genesis. In other words, who is Ishmael? He is the father of all the dark-skinned peoples of the world. The whale that Melville is trying to get us to own is, and we should not miss his point here, an indefinite, omnipresent specter of whiteness. And Melville knew exactly what he was doing in the year 1851, living in a country that systematically and violently denied the humanity of millions of people based on the color of their skin, when he begins his great American novel with the words, "Call me Ishmael." Okay, that's a firm enough note to end on for today. No office hours on Friday. It's still technically History Day. We have one more class meeting for the year. That's Monday on Zoom, where we'll talk about this letter to Hawthorne. So make sure that that's on your calendars, what time to be there. It's listed on the master calendar. We have spots open on Monday. We just haven't really taken advantage of them too much since we've been asynchronous this term. But yeah, make sure to be there because it's our last chance to wrap things up. We've ended Moby-Dick, but Melville finished the novel when he was only 31. So we have to figure out how his story ended, because that's illuminating in his own right, and to see how Moby-Dick got from his desk to us today. You got to imagine that if this book is the great American novel, it will still keep speaking to us today. So let's talk about that a little bit more on Monday. For now, congratulations. You finished a beast of a book, mostly on your own. And if you've read Moby-Dick, there's really nothing that you can't just pick up and read from this point on. So you should feel amazing about that. Great work, you guys, really. Thank you all for sailing around the world with Melville and with me. That's it. I will see you Monday, and go own some whales, whatever that means. See you guys.